Good morning, everyone. We're going to be talking about Patch Management Best Practices 2023 edition. So, for those of you who are longtime Ivanti customers and have attended things like our interchange event, you may remember this was a very popular session that we had many years running. So, joining me today, of course, Todd Shell. Many of you know Todd from either previous Patch Management Best Practices sessions or our Patch Tuesday webinar event. And also joining us is Sam from the team as well, who Sam is the product manager who heads up our Neurons for Patch Management solution. So many of you who have been participating in the development of that know Sam very well by now. She's going to be participating in the conversation and leading some excellent demos of some of the technology pieces we're going to be talking about today. As we go through, please feel free to submit some questions there if you do have any along the way. And with that, we're going to get started. So we're going to cover a few things here. Discovery as a foundation for any vulnerability management conversation. Really, it's kind of the starting point of everything. If you look at common frameworks like NIST, it's the foundational piece of that. If you can't see it, you don't know about it, and you can't protect it. So how do you patch it? So discovery, we're going to talk about the blind spots that leaves you if you don't have an effective discovery capability in your environment. Prioritization and improved collaboration. I just got back from Gartner last week, and there was a lot of conversation about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but that's a critical piece of this process, and you will lose a lot of time in trying to get patches remediated if you don't have good collaboration between security and operations. And then we're going to have some conversation around elements of an effective rollout. Sam's going to give us some great tips and tricks, some demonstration of current product, and a glimpse of some of the things to come. We'll also talk about how you can participate as a design partner if you choose there as well. And then we're going to get into some additional talk about SLAs, remediation frequency, compliance reporting, and other considerations that you want to make sure that you're thinking through in your patch remediation process. All right, so getting started. First off, discovery is a foundation for good cyber hygiene. Washing your hands, scrubbing your face, everything else. Good hygiene is important to keep healthy. Same thing in the digital world. We want to make sure that we've provided a good kind of foundation for ensuring our cyber hygiene throughout our environments. Discovery, if not done effectively, can lead to a few challenges that I've kind of outlined here. It can basically provide footholds for attackers. An unknown or unmanaged device means that you're not protecting it. You're not patching it. You're not detecting what might be attacking it. Endpoint protection and EDR might not be loaded on there or giving you visibility. It will basically become a blind spot that, trust me, threat actors will have reconnaissance to find. This can also hinder incident response. If we don't have the ability to detect an incident, we don't have the forensic data that we need to be able to look at that. We don't know what that workload's doing or potentially even how to access it. So knowing what devices are and ensuring that we've got them managed, and if something were to happen, we're getting good information from them and can access them. So critical staff can get to them in the case of an investigation is important. Of course, there's the governance and compliance side of things. Many of you are in highly regulated parts of the industry, whether it's finance or government or healthcare, whatever the case may be. Many of you are operating under certain regulatory requirements. From a compliance and governance standpoint, you need to know what's your environment. They need to be audited regularly, and you need to be able to account for those if an incident were to occur. And of course, the end of life. Now, many of you have been hearing all about the Server 2012 end of life and extended support. That's a very good example of how devices, as they age, the OS or the software on them could lead to a device becoming a vulnerability in your environment because it's no longer being maintained. So those are a couple of the things that a good discovery capability will help to resolve many of these issues. All right, we're going to shift into starting to talk a bit more about vulnerability prioritization. So I'm going to show you in a second here what types of information you can get out of a risk-based vulnerability management platform. But here's a little bit of the blind spot that occurs if you don't have this type of capability. The majority of, we can track which vulnerabilities are tied to ransomware campaigns. We're scouring the dark web. We're looking at the ransomware as a service vendors. We're seeing what vulnerabilities they're targeting. We're keeping track of common ransomware attacks and capturing which vulnerabilities were being utilized in those. There is a comprehensive list of vulnerabilities that are tied to ransomware. The challenge is 74% of those, this is our survey down here that this came from, is with a partnership with our vendor we work with regularly called Securin. This was from our 2023 Spotlight report around ransomware. In that report, we evaluated and found 74% of those ransomware vulnerabilities were not rated as critical. So the CVSS score was falling below the radar in most organizations' prioritization. If you're looking at things like the CISA KEV list, 156 of the ransomware vulnerabilities that were being tracked at the time of that report were not included in CISA KEV. 20 of those ransomware vulnerabilities were not being able to be detected consistently by many of the top vulnerability scanners. So this can be a regular blind spot within an organization, and that's just what's tied to ransomware. There's a lot of vulnerabilities out there. Actually, the Q2 when this was captured, there were 275,000 vulnerabilities being tracked in our RBVM platform. This is now over 290,000. 38,000, actually just over 39,000 now, are weaponized. CISA's KEV list is a list of weaponized vulnerabilities that are being targeted. That's only about 1,000 strong. So if you're using something like that, consider that a very basic form of RBVM, but it's really just scratching the surface. 1,000 CVEs in CISA KEV versus over 39,000 weaponized vulnerabilities being tracked in our RBVM platform. So then you get down towards what's tied to ransomware, what's trending or active. This gives you a view of that funnel and allows you to see, if you start working from right to left, you'll be able to reduce risk in your environment, not just reduce the number of vulnerabilities detected, but specifically going after exposures in your environment that can be targeted and are being targeted by threat actors. So that's the type of perspective that a risk-based vulnerability management platform brings. So we're going to jump into RBVM real quick, and we're going to take a look at what that type of solution can provide you for visibility. So this is the Ivanti risk-based vulnerability management platform. You can see here a very comprehensive dashboard. I can get things like my overall risk in my environment. I can see the assets that have been detected findings in my environment. I can see the assets that have weaponized findings within my environment. Everything in here tries to drive towards an understanding of risk and driving towards SLAs for remediation. This timeline's a little bit boring here. It's a demo environment, so it stays pretty consistent over time. But this is showing me findings versus remediation. I can see, again, that type of funnel view perspective in the product. Everything in here is kind of working from that perspective of total findings and then getting into risk. What's weaponized? What's more dangerous, RCE or PE? What's trending or tied to ransomware campaigns? All of this starts to drive towards a focus where I can look at the most dangerous findings in my environment and I can work with those first to reduce my risk. So we're going to go and look at the ransomware dashboard really quick. So here we've got a total of 1,636 findings that are all tied to ransomware. We can see here the funnel view here, the total findings, ransomware exposures in our environment, ransomware exposures that include remote code execution or privilege escalation, and then what are trending amongst the ransomware threat actors. So think of that trend as your social barometer. This is what is most commonly coming up in the breaches that you're seeing in the headlines that are coming out. That's, again, where we can get into very specific information about those host findings and see exactly which vulnerabilities are exposed in our environment and be able to resolve those quickly and easily. All right, so that is the perspective of getting to a better prioritization within your environment. This allows you to pull in vulnerability data from all of your network scanners. So Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7, very common. One common theme that I heard last week is a lot more of you are starting to use Defender for vulnerability assessment on the Windows side, and another vulnerability scanner for the rest of your infrastructure. So this is starting to get more and more complex as your vulnerability scanning tools get complex. Those of you who are running DevOps environments, you've got a variety of code scanners, manual pen tests, and other things there. Ivanti has multiple code scanners we're using. We also have regular pen tests, both internal and external, being done by our partners over at Securin and of a variety of our products. So we want to be able to pull in not only the two different vulnerability scanners we're using, the findings from there. We want to pull in those code scanning findings. We also want to pull in those manual findings and be able to get a comprehensive view and drive remediation into things like Ivanti's patch management solution, which we're going to show you in just a moment. Also be able to push the DevOps things directly into a Jira or ADO backlog, or drive remediation efforts for vulnerabilities that are more complex directly into the ticketing systems. So that's very important, being able to drive not just patch remediation, but the rest of the vulnerabilities that are being tracked in your environment. So prioritization and driving a workflow towards remediation is a critical part of what you want to think through in your broader vulnerability management process. There was a couple of builds on there. Here we go. What this is going to help you to do, and this was a big part of the conversation last week, we had the tagline of helping to reduce the friction between security and IT. I had a number of CISOs and CIOs come up to our booth just after reading that one statement. We had a session specifically on this that was extremely well attended, that people came back and were just asking us for the presentation for that topic alone. You're actually going to see that tomorrow. Darren is going to be presenting that same session for you all in tomorrow's kickoff keynote. But reducing this friction is a very important part of the vulnerability remediation process. Many of you know you've got vulnerabilities that are being detected by the security team, and they come over and give you a report. We're going to show you how quickly we can do that handoff between the vulnerability solutions and our patch management solutions right now. My demo environment, permissions changed overnight. Literally, we did this yesterday and it was all working. Sam can attest to that. Today, the list is not showing in product. So what we're showing you is a screenshot of what you're going to be looking at here. But basically, we are able to go and provide a list of CVEs and populate that into the patch group within the patch management solution. So I'm going to step you through the RBVM part of that, and then we're going to hand off to Sam here in just a minute to show the patch management side of that demonstration. So the security team is going to be looking at the vulnerabilities in their environment. I've got a list of vulnerabilities that I've detected, and I want to pass these over to the operations team for remediation. So from here, I've got my list of CVEs. I've selected those. Now I'm going to go and add those to a patch group. Those of you who have been using Ivanti's patch solutions for many years, you know what that patch group is. It's basically a container containing the list of patches that you've approved for remediation in your environment. Okay, so this should have populated that list we had there. We're going to show you that in a moment here, but I also have the ability to create a new patch group. We're just going to call this my virtual summit test, just so you can see that being created there. So this is now being pushed via API over to the patch management solution. So in the Neuron side, and Sam's going to go through this in a little bit more depth here in just a moment, we have the ability to go in and see all the different patches and updates that are supported by the Ivanti catalog. And we can open up and see, oh, I lost the screen there, going back, come on. My virtual summit test right there. This is the list of all those CVEs are resolved by these three updates across Windows 8 and Server 2012 R2, Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2, and Server 2012. So that list of about 10 or so updates could all be resolved by those three for remediation. There's also a way to do a manual CVE import. So if you're not using our RBVM platform, don't worry, you can do this process just as easily. I'm going to go and select a file here. And that file is one that has a list of several CVEs that are being detected in my environment by the vulnerability scanner. It found 396 matches within our catalog. So a very large list of updates that are going to be applied there. I've applied that now, and I can go and look at the list of all the updates that would be added for that reason. So now I can select all of those and add those to a patch group for remediation. All right. So we've talked through going through discovery. We've talked through going through the prioritization process and the handoff from security to operations. Next, Sam, one of the biggest things that I think a lot of people are interested in is trying to automate and simplify the overall rollout of updates across there. Talk to us a little bit about how an organization could help reduce that time and effort.
Absolutely. So I think having that really tight ring deployment strategy is going to become kind of the standard moving forward. In the past, we've maybe had, here's my workstations versus my servers, here's my schedule, my approach to each of those. But really what we're seeing as the threats continue to escalate and come out faster and faster, you need a more kind of robust strategy to be able to respond to those in an effective way. So we're seeing ring deployments or campaign deployments becoming more and more common. I'm going to talk about from a demo perspective how you can support that in Ivanti Neurons for patch management today. Chris kind of gave it a shout out at the beginning that we're going to give you guys a preview of what's coming. And you can see on the slides here a couple of prototypes, visual mock-ups of what we're talking about from a ring deployment perspective within Ivanti Neurons for patch management. This is a concept that we're planning to develop in 2024 in terms of our product roadmap, but really what we are hearing and what we're seeing with ring deployment is I need an effective way to really strategically roll out those patches across my environment. I want to identify those issues early. So really making sure I've got an effective test group or ring group one, reduce that administrative time and effort by having that really meaningful early test group, having a really targeted group two, so that you've got that bigger pool of devices, kind of a larger set to then look at trends from a deployment perspective, so that if anything comes up in those first two rings, you can then prevent that patch from moving into that broad deployment group. Because as you have a patch go out from a broad deployment perspective, if you run into any issues there, that's going to be a huge administrative overhead to then have to jump in and kind of take action there, manage those calls from a support perspective as well. So really important to focus on quality as patches are getting deployed out. Again, really focusing on those early, especially that test ring one and then ring two before you hit that broad deployment perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch over and demo some of what this looks like from a ring deployment perspective out in Ivanti Neurons for patch management today. Again, that preview that Chris just had on the slide, that's kind of an early preview of what we're planning to develop from a ring deployment perspective in 2024. But hopefully you guys can see my screen now. I'm going to do some live demo out in Ivanti Neurons for patch management. I'm actually going to start in patch intelligence, and what Chris
Sam, we're
alluded
not
to.
seeing your screen yet. Go ahead and try to share again.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, no, it is. Apparently
There it
my
goes.
screen didn't switch over yet. It took a second. Go,
Oh,
you're good.
no worries. All right, so I'm out in patch intelligence. Kind of Chris alluded to how meaningful your patch groups can be. So if you've got that full integration set up between Ivanti Neurons for risk-based vulnerability and Ivanti Neurons for patch management, you're going to be able to push CVEs, those prioritized CVEs that Chris was just talking about in Ivanti Neurons for risk-based vulnerability management, into a patch group for Ivanti Neurons for patch management. So typically what this is going to look like out in patch intelligence, I'm going to go ahead and open up that manage patch groups view. If you're really focused on a ring deployment strategy, you're going to go ahead and you're going to set up your patch groups based on rings. So your ring one, my numbers are a little extreme here just for the sake of demo, but your ring one is largely going to be your largest patch count. This is that first step in terms of getting approved patches into the ring deployment process in Ivanti Neurons for patch management. What Chris was talking about before, ideally, your security team is going to push through that integration, push their prioritized CVEs into this ring one test patch group. And then you've got your ring two and your ring three. So as you work through that initial ring testing and deployment with your test group, as you're saying, okay, these patches are good, they successfully deployed, I'm ready to add them to my ring 2, my targeted patch group. They do well in your ring 2, you can go ahead and add them to ring 3. This is going to be currently a manual configuration, so you are going to bump them from each patch group to the next. That also gives you complete control over which patches are moving forward. So in the event that you see something from a deployment failure perspective in ring 1, you've got complete control. You do not have to add those patches to ring 2. Same thing, if you run into any failures or issues in ring 2, you want to do additional investigation, you can hold back in adding those patches to your ring 3. But want to give kind of a visual example of what this patch group organization looks like today in Ivanti Neurons for patch management from a ring deployment perspective. So that first step in organization and that ongoing kind of what are you going to interact with the most is really going to be the movement of patches into these rings as you work through a ring deployment strategy.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. We're going to step into the next topic here just for the sake of time. We've got kind of building on that next. Todd, augmenting your testing. So Sam just laid out how to break down those groups into pilot, targeted, and then broader kind of production. There's a couple of things that people can do to augment that testing to try to make that pilot part as quick as possible. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things that people can look at.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chris. The vendors provide some information about the patches and how they're supposed to work and what they're trying to fix from a CVE perspective. But when it comes down to where the rubber meets the road, are they actually performing as you expect? Are you hearing things from other organizations? It's hard to actually gather some of this information sometime. So, Chris, you on our intro, you talked about the fact that we do our Patch Tuesday series. That's once a month where Chris and I provide some perspective on what patches came out in the last day or two and what we're seeing in our environments, our test environments, et cetera. But again, that's only once a month. Sam just showed you a demo there of patch intelligence within our Neurons platform. That information is updated continuously. So in there, there's an assurance section that shows you actually, are these patches installing properly? Can you see that information? And it's available in our patch intelligence. And then for more information outside of our organization, there's a group called, well, there's a lot of groups, there's Reddit and others, but one of the ones that we strongly recommend is getting signed up to patchmanagement.org. This is where you can interact with fellow IT specialists about what you're seeing in the field. There's all kinds of discussion on the latest patches, latest updates, problems people are seeing, et cetera. So you can help, debug your environment and also help other people with problems that they're seeing. So very good interactive group to be a part of. Moving on for some other deployment considerations here, you have to take a look at what is your policy in your organization. And this is oftentimes associated with the type of endpoints and the need for their updating. For example, you can have an aggressive, very dynamic policy. This may be like your sales team with their laptops in the field. They're out there, they're exposed. You want to make sure that they have the latest patches in place because they're going to be logging in from coffee shops and different customer environments. So you want very fast remediation. And you want to basically reduce the risk of them being exploited. So you want to turn those patches around very quickly. Now, and you're maybe a little bit less concerned about stability in that case. But if you're going into your heavy production environment where you have critical servers to your business, this is where you get into a very controlled or a static policy. Configuration control becomes very important. You want to make sure that you've checked out these patches in depth ahead of time, and you want to make sure that you deploy them very closely and very carefully on a schedule to reduce overall operational impacts. Of course, there's variations between all of these, but these are things to consider when you're putting together your policies.
All right. Thanks, Todd. Now, one thing that's been changing a lot, and I think this kind of puts it together, Todd also is responsible for kind of managing our content team. So those of you who know we have a content team that's constantly releasing new updates. Todd, talk us through how frequently these updates are coming.
Yeah. Chris, we talked about Patch Tuesday, how Microsoft is kind of consolidating on releasing their major security patches once a month. But that's not true for all the other vendors. And I grabbed a bunch of information here over the last quarter to kind of show exactly what's happening. The three red lines coming down the middle of the screen are those Patch Tuesdays when Microsoft released. And this shows the relationship between three different vendors and the releases that came out. Now, Adobe Acrobat here on the top one is a very mature product, and Adobe has pretty much come around to kind of supporting exactly the Patch Tuesday model. You can see that they've generally been releasing a major update once a quarter. So in this case, it was the August Patch Tuesday. You can see they addressed 30 vulnerabilities in a release there. They had a very minor release in September. So we'll expect here in 2 months that they'll come out with another major update. Now in the middle here showing Mozilla Firefox, again, getting into the browsers. We know that these are being updated much more frequently. I did include and show the major updates here. You can see that they're kind of standardizing on once a month. You can see that looking just prior to each one of the Patch Tuesday lines are addressing 13, 14, 13 vulnerabilities here. I did include some additional updates in here, the little ones across the bottom, so those do come up periodically. They're still considered security updates, but they haven't necessarily published CVE information associated with those. But you can see that there's still quite a few updates coming out. There on the bottom, we've talked about kind of the poster child for churn, Mozilla Firefox in this example. You can see that they're releasing on kind of a as needed schedule here. A lot of updates throughout the months, almost 2 or 3 updates a week sometimes. And it's very difficult to keep up with in terms of making sure that you have the latest updates in place at all times. So kind of 3 examples here of what we're seeing from different vendors and approaches on how quickly they release security updates for their products, Chris.
So that gets us into a couple of other considerations that people are going to want to think through. Remediation frequency, SLAs and compliance reporting, and zero-day response. Now, conversations that we've had with a few of you, we know that our customers are going as fast as 48 hours of release of updates for things like the browsers. Google Chrome releases an update. We've got customers who are trying to remediate those within 48 hours of release, not test, full remediation. They're trying to get compliant with that very quickly. So trying to get to that level of visibility is important. You saw by especially the Mozilla and the Google Chrome release cadences there, it gets to be a pretty continuous cycle. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to get that compliance view here in just a second. Sam is going to show us the compliance reporting view and how you can kind of get that visual there. But think through how quickly you want to remediate. And here, stop thinking about just patching. One of the things that literally changed the way you're asking this question, how long do you want to leave your environment exposed to a vulnerability? That's the way we need to ask this question because it changes the tone of the conversation. There, we're not talking about a operational execution. We're talking about reducing risk. If we know there's something that's actively being targeted or exploited, how long do we want to remain exposed to that vulnerability? So that should be driving the answer to questions like, what is my remediation frequency? What are the KPIs that my SLAs and my compliance reporting should be targeting? What is my zero-day response? So as we get into that, Sam, why don't you bring up and show us a little bit of what we've provided in the compliance reporting experience?
Absolutely. So my screen should be coming through here momentarily. So yeah, let's talk about compliance reporting. Really the biggest thing from a compliance reporting perspective is how well can you visualize that data? It's one thing to have it kind of benchmarked and defined as here's our requirement, but being able to visualize and see that trend over time is critically important. Now, just for the sake of quick demo, we've got some very quick kind of demo data sets. You might have an SLA, again, like we were talking about before. Overall, what's my entire environment? That's our default report. We're going to go ahead and look at all of the devices that are out there being managed by Ivanti Neurons for patch management, give you an idea of how you're trending over time. You can then get more granular with it. In some cases, you might be going by type, like we were talking about earlier. In other cases, you might be going, hey, I want to measure myself based on my ring deployment configuration strategy. My ring 1, I want a very aggressive SLA that I'm measuring myself against. Ring 2, maybe a little bit more generous. And your ring 3 is going to be that final threshold in terms of if I've got a 14-day SLA, maybe you're more aggressive than that. I need to make sure my broad deployment group is hitting this compliance threshold. So you can get very strategic and granular as you want to from a compliance reporting perspective, but being able to visualize and see this data, critically important to be able to respond to where do I have gaps from an SLA perspective. I can go ahead and drill into one of these reports and get a feel for the devices that are included in this report set. Where am I compliant? Where am I not compliant? I can go ahead and drill into this device that's not currently compliant and get an idea of what patches have been installed, which patches are missing, so that I know where to focus my time and attention. So these are these patches that are currently counting against me from a compliance perspective. Really critical that you can see this trend over time, but then be able to drill into the details and see even down to a specific device on a specific day, moment in time, where am I at from a compliance perspective so I can take action and remediate those vulnerabilities in my environment. So a quick demo, but like I said, option to go based on device, ring deployment, really use your strategy and represent it here in your compliance reporting configuration to get that full trend over time and to track your progress. And we've had a lot of customers use this kind of in auditing situations as well. A great visual representation to show how you're performing against that steady SLA requirement that your organization has established.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.